Moving on up to the next generation of Resident Evil. I know we technically still have Resident Evil Survivor to do from the PS1 era, but that's an arcade shooter as opposed to the survival horror genre we've grown used to at this point. Code Veronica started off as a failed attempt to port Resident Evil 2 over to the Sega Saturn, but then turned into a new project exclusively for the Dreamcast, for about a year until it transferred over to the PlayStation 2, which a lot more people owned at the time. That poor, noisy little machine. You also remember in the Resident Evil 3 video how alongside that game there was another title in development that Capcom wanted to be the next main entry in the series? Well, Code Veronica was that other game. Resident Evil 3 started off as a side story before becoming the official third game, but Code Veronica was built from the ground up to continue the plot of Resident Evil 1 and 2, technically making this the true Resident Evil 3. The series was making the jump to next gen, but the gameplay very much sticks to its normal roots, but I wouldn't say it's completely accurate to call this just another classic Resident Evil game, but for the PS2 and Dreamcast. It can easily be seen that way, which I kind of understand why, and it's difficult to describe how I don't quite feel that's the case, but I think some of it does have to do with the console shift, allowing for a more cinematic feel and obviously better graphics and presentation. Just to make the Dreamcast version even more obsolete, the PS2 conversion, known as Code Veronica X, apparently has 10 minutes worth of extra cutscenes to further flesh out certain plot details, though I honestly couldn't tell you what it was or where it happens. Capcom also claimed to have enhanced the graphics somewhat, but if they did, it's hard to notice. If you want the best looking version anyway, you're better off getting Code Veronica X on the PS3 or Xbox 360, as that one has proper widescreen support and updated visuals. I've had the PS3 version for years, but I originally wanted to record Code Veronica on the PS4 so that I didn't have to bypass the PS3's HDCP security block. I bought the PS4 version, and as it turns out, it's just a direct port of the PS2 version, which I wish I had known about because I already sunk 4 hours into the PS4 one. I then saw that the PS3 copy I've had for a long time is a proper remaster, to which I said, God damn it, and so I played through that one, getting back to where I was in about 2 hours. I know it probably wouldn't have mattered to some of you if I simply carried on with the PS4 version, but I like to try and provide the best quality I can, and that would have personally bothered me. Anywho, I managed to play through the rest of the game with the PS3 version, so that's what I'll be basing this review on. I'm glad I finally finished Code Veronica 2 because I've started this game up quite a few times but never really got further than the palace area, which is only around an hour or so in. This may have been because, like I said, it simply looked like yet another classic Resident Evil, same game, different coat of paint, so it may have just given me the wrong first impression. But I have a plot to go through first before I get into any of that. It's 3 months after the events of Resident Evil 2, but also takes place before Resident Evil 3, and we're once again in the shoes of Claire Redfield, who's still looking for her brother Chris Redfield from the first Resident Evil. The game starts off with Claire escaping from an umbrella facility she broke into, and right off the bat you can see how Code Veronica and the Resident Evil series in general become more and more over the top with each passing game. The opening cutscene is Claire running away from a bunch of umbrella goons shooting at her, followed by a helicopter with a chain gun that hits everything but the person they're trying to shoot. For God's sake, you have a targeting computer, use it! Then after Claire gets ambushed by more Umbrella henchmen, she pulls off a near impossible gun maneuver to blow up the explosives behind them straight out of a John Woo movie. Claire still ends up getting captured regardless and held in Rockford Island, located in the Southern Ocean, essentially Guantanamo Bay run by Umbrella. However, one of the guards lets her out of her cell, and upon stepping outside, Claire discovers that another T-virus outbreak has occurred within the island. While trying to find a way off of the establishment, she comes face to face with another escaped prisoner, Steve Burnside, an extremely cocky and insufferable little shit that unsubtly develops the hots for Claire as the two spend more time together. They split up for a bit at least until Claire stumbles across a palace nearby owned by Alfred Ashford, who's also the governor of Rockford Island, containing anybody that rivals Umbrella. And assisting Alfred is his twin sister, Alexia. Except not quite. The twins were pretty much inseparable, like really inseparable. I don't want to have to call this res-incest evil, but that definitely seems like what's going on here. They were as close as siblings could be anyway, but Alexia has actually been kept in a cryogenic sleep for 15 years with the T. Veronica virus inside her that the Ashford family put together, Veronica being the name of the twins' mother. However, because of the time apart between the twins, Alfred seems to suffer from a lot of separation anxiety and loneliness, thus leaving him stricken Titan with multiple personalities, one of his own and one of Alexia, even going as far as pulling off a Norman Bates and cross-dressing as Alexia. Unfortunately, we don't go any further than that with Alfred, which I'll explain in a bit. What I think Veronica wants you to get more excited for, though, is the return of Albert Wesker, the now former captain of STARS that betrayed everyone in the original Resident Evil and supposedly died. The reason I say I think is because Wesker comes right the hell out of nowhere in the middle of your exploring and confronts Claire, demanding to know where Chris is. After that, Wesker just goes away for the time being, with Claire and Steve eventually figuring out how to activate a conveniently placed seaplane to escape Rockford Island. But Alfred unleashes a new form of Tyrant to go after them while Claire makes her way back. The Tyrant's basically the same as it was in previous games, just with spiky sock and boppers for hands, and you can still kill it in a short amount of time with your best weapons. It's a bit different when it sneaks on board the seaplane, however, because you need to keep shooting at it to eventually slow down its movements, allowing you to unlatch a crate and have it knock the Tyrant out of the plane. This fight is kind of a pain in the ass to do though, because like other Tyrants, it has such a wide attack window, and the room is claustrophobic as hell, making it beyond difficult not to get hit and lose a fair bit of health. Well, after the Tyrant is defeated anyway, Alfred hijacks the plane to crash down into an umbrella base in Antarctica, which also seems to have suffered from a viral outbreak, and encounter Alfred one last time to finish him off for good. But just before he dies, he frees Alexia from her chamber, who is ready to carry out her plan. I assume that plan being to spread the Veronica virus all over the globe, because that's what all Resident Evil villains do, but I don't remember them actually explaining that. Either way, Alexia's a very goal-driven lady. She's just woken up after a 15-year slumber, and she immediately springs into action. No questions about the future, what the heck the internet is, who won between Biden and Trump, nothing. Now that's dedication. Anyway, Claire and Steve find another getaway vehicle to make another escape, but this time Alexia catches up to them with her mutated tentacle arms, sure, why not, and keeps them as her prisoners. This leads us to the second half of the game, where we take control of Chris Redfield, who received a message from Leon Kennedy saying that Claire is stuck on Rockford Island, giving us an excuse to retread most of the same territory we just went through as Claire. This includes Wesker once again randomly appearing to taunt Chris and explain that he's looking for a sample of the Veronica virus from Alexia's body. Just like in Claire's scenario, Chris finds another plane that happened to be there and still fully working, to use as a means of getting to Antarctica and continue searching for his sister. He manages to do so after some time investigating and releases her from the sticky stuff she's covered in. The reunion falls short though, as Claire wants to find the captured Steve. I personally want to leave him because he's an annoying pest, but Claire's determination guides her to a nearby cell with the kidnapped Steve, who's been injected with the Veronica virus, turning him into a monster that goes after Claire. This was another moment that can bite me. You're supposed to run away from the mutated Steve until you trigger a cutscene, but there's absolutely no way not to get hit, even if you immediately turn 180 degrees and book it. And if you get hit twice, you're instantly dead. Healing items are also a lot more scarce than the PS1 trilogy, and by this point I didn't have any left. So in order for me to just about get away with it, I had to circle around Steve to have him try to hit me, and then use his recovery time as a chance to run away. I still got hit once, but I barely made it to the end. Didn't like this part at all. And every time you die, you're sent a few rooms back, meaning you have to solve the puzzles again. Afterwards, one of Alexia's tentacles grabs a hold of Claire to let Steve kill her, but he regains composure and turns onto Alexia, who then fatally wounds him. As he becomes human again, Steve confesses his love for Claire, an affection that's somehow more phoned in than Ada's relationship with Leon in Resident Evil 2, and Steve finally passes away.
Oh no, not Steve, he was my favorite.
We then once more come back to Chris, who sees Wesker commanding Alexia to give him the virus sample. Alexia of course refuses and tries to attack him, mutating herself into a half-human, half-dragonfly hybrid. The dragonfly previously shown as a metaphor for something involving royalty, I think? I honestly don't know, and I don't care enough to find out. Wesker again promptly leaves, later retrieving Steve's corpse for further experimenting, while Chris has to take care of Alexia. She's defeated for the time being, and Chris manages to break Claire out of the cell containing her and Steve. As the two activate the base's self-destruct sequence, they come across Alexia in a new form. This battle's another thorn in my side, because on top of Alexia spitting poisonous chemicals and swiping with her tentacles, there are these little bugs that constantly interrupt your shooting, leaving you vulnerable to more attacks. You can kill them, but they'll keep respawning no matter what. I don't know why the bosses in this game are so irritating to deal with. Most of them were okay in the PS1 trilogy, what happened here? This also applies to Alexia's final form as a giant deadly dragonfly, and you're supposed to use this plasma launcher to deal the killing blow, but because Alexia moves so quickly and aiming is so slow, even this part's difficult to do smoothly. Alexia is dead nevertheless after finally landing a shot. Chris and Wesker have one big fist fight before Wesker again retreats like a little bitch and swears vengeance on Chris like a Saturday morning cartoon villain.
Today's your lucky day. Next time we meet, don't count on another. Until we meet again.
See you at the boulder punching fiesta, Wesker. Chris and Claire escape the exploding base via the plane Chris took earlier, and the game recreates the true ending to Resident Evil 2, where they decide to take down Umbrella once and for all. Code Veronica's story is sort of a mixed bag for me. I like this almost episodic nature they've been going for since Resident Evil 2, but if they were going to do that, I kinda wish they'd take a little more time to expand on the relationships between some of the characters. Chris and Claire don't get a lot of time together before the game's over. Any attempts to flesh out Steve is pretty pathetic, to put it bluntly, but the most notable is Wesker just coming and going for the few times the plot demands that he's there. Again, I don't remember if they ever explain how he's returned. I think being killed by the Tyrant in the first game was all part of the plan or something, and now he's got cat eyes and super abilities from watching The Matrix too many times, because what wasn't inspired from that in the early 2000s? The voice acting's still pretty silly, which I've come to expect by now, but Wesker definitely takes the cake. He's now developed this ridiculous half-American, half-English accent, and on top of his goofy, maniacal laughs, he's very entertaining, to the point that I don't think we got enough of Wesker. He isn't quite at Resident Evil 5 levels of hilarious yet, but he's getting there, and I guess it's better to be left with wanting more than too much. All in all though, Wesker's only purpose in this game is to tell you, hey, he's back, and then just leaves to tease the player some more by making them wait for the next game. They don't even bother trying to hide his reveal in the X re-release, because he's right there on the damn title screen. How little did Capcom care about this? I thought as Code Veronica's main antagonist, the Ashford twins got a better deal than Wesker did. To start with, if Wesker brought in a delicious plate full of ham and cheese, Alfred brings an entire feast with him, making for some of the most unintentionally funny moments I think Resident Evil's ever gotten.
Please try and keep me amused, and do not disappoint me by dying too soon. I so want to enjoy this.
Alfred's definitely the show stealer here, but I wanted to dive a bit more into his multiple personalities. Maybe have his persona as Alexia run so deep that he completely turns into Alexia by the end with no way of returning to his former self. The real Alexia does exist, however, and she can be fairly intimidating since her head's screwed on a little tighter, and she's got that death stare that tells you she's seen some things, man. But she does this exaggerated cackle for basically anything, so she still comes off as somewhat comical. The dragonfly forms are pretty cool though. So far, one of the more creative transformations from these games in my opinion, as opposed to the giant blobs with teeth we've had a few times before. In contrast, and I'm definitely not the only one who thinks this, but Steve really sucks. People like to pick on Ashley from Resident Evil 4 for being annoying, but she's an angel compared to this dude. Always whining, always getting into trouble, and a couple of times even causing the trouble. Once where after saving him from a booby trap, he refuses to hand over the golden Lugers he needs to solve a puzzle until you find the submachine guns later on, and another time in Antarctica where he's supposed to pilot the getaway vehicle to an easy to reach location. He's too busy fawning over Claire though, so he gets distracted and the vehicle bursts a pipe filled with poisonous gas, thus having to explore more of the base to find a way to get rid of it. And yeah, let's talk about Steve's desire to get into Claire's panties. This dude is way too horny during a situation like this, and the quote-unquote chemistry the game wants to establish between Steve and Claire is so amazingly fake. Claire's clearly not interested in Steve in the slightest, but after he dies, she's blubbering over his dead body like we're supposed to believe she had strong feelings for him too. And why would she? Steve's a creep. He tries to kiss her while she's asleep at one point. If this game came out today, Twitter would have been raging all over this scene. Either that or Claire possibly being transphobic.
But I cannot let you escape now.
Alfred! You cross-dressing freak!
Whoa, hey Claire, come on, it's the 21st century. Don't pull a JK Rowling on us. But back to Steve, there are also a few times where the game tries to paint him as misunderstood by only trusting himself and nobody else, or one scene where he has to shoot his zombified father. These seem like moments I should be invested in, but because Steve's already proven to be such an unlikable character, and his motives change so sporadically that I really don't care what he's thinking or what he's going through. The only thing I felt from Steve was exasperation, nothing more, nothing less. I want to say I don't have as many complaints for the gameplay, but I have a few major problems with that as well. Now don't mistake me, it's still classic Resident Evil above all else, only now we're in the PlayStation 2 and Dreamcast era. The graphics look pretty good for early 6th generation, the gameplay's still solid for the most part, and everything works the way it did previously. Tank controls included, but hell, I think we're used to them by now. Proper analog control was starting to appear more in games around this time, but I think Code Veronica came out just before they were becoming commonplace. And to the game's favor, the camera angles are a bit more dynamic than the original 3 Resident Evils. You still get fixed angles here and there, but sometimes the camera will follow Claire or Chris to not always make you look at things from a literal different perspective. If you've played the PS1 Resident Evil trilogy, then you should feel right at home with Code Veronica. You explore, shoot zombies and other creatures, solve puzzles, and cluelessly run around because many of the areas are really dark even for Resident Evil. The HD version does increase the lighting to make things a little easier to the eyes, but despite the leap to next-gen consoles, everything looks rather dank compared to the other games, which is the whole point of Resident Evil, I'm aware, but this did make collectible items like herbs or ammo way harder to spot. You see, like right there, I just made a lucky guess. How's anyone supposed to see that? This is even worse with the original graphics because of the lower resolution and brightness, and because everywhere is so dark, a chunk of the areas sort of blend in together, which is really not what you need, as Code Veronica also contains a lot more backtracking than the other games. Backtracking has always been the case with Resident Evil, but not to this extent. There are so many times in this game where you have to run to one side of the building to pick up an item, and then have to run all the way to the other side to use that item and hope that's the right one you needed, otherwise that's even more backtracking you have to do. I had to bring up a guide a few times because of it, and for the life of me not remembering where everything was, even with a functioning map, due to how samey a lot of the rooms appear, such as bringing medicine back to the guard that broke out Claire, where he then gives you a lockpick to open these cases storing powerful ammo and gun parts. The worst example for me was where I found this emblem in the military training facility that you spend a long time thoroughly searching, and I figured I had to put it somewhere nearby, but no, it's actually all the way back at the starting prison area by the guillotine. The backtracking only gets more monotonous when you take control of Chris around the halfway point, and once again look into Rockford Island and the Antarctic base. It is interesting to see how Chris adapts to the environmental changes since Claire visited, but it nevertheless feels like a ton of unnecessary retreading, despite not being one-to-one the same. This wasn't a big issue in Resident Evil 1 and 2 because you were given the choice to pick whichever character you wanted to play as, with the other being entirely optional, but Code Veronica forces you to play as both Claire and Chris just to finish the game. Granted, you did miss a couple of different scenario changes, an extra final boss, and various endings in the first 2 games by not completing both characters' stories, but those were more like rewards for going above and beyond. It wasn't a necessity for every single player to do, whereas here it is, assuming you want to see the credits roll. On top of this, Code Veronica's difficulty is all over the place. Not so much with the puzzles, they're still fairly simple to solve, except for this one with the paperweight that I have no idea what the solution was. No, it's more that some areas are easy enough to clear with basic enemies and obstacles, but other rooms are filled to the brim with them and are very tricky, if not impossible, to dodge from. Right at the very beginning of the game, your first encounter with zombies is at a graveyard chock full of the bastards, but I swear there's no way to bypass this one zombie without getting bitten and pushing it back. Claire also gets the Bandersnatches later on, who enter their inner Stretch Armstrong and extend their arms to hurt her. But again, they're insanely frustrating to dodge, and the fixed camera angles don't often show them, which makes dealing with them more infuriating. Chris gets the Hunters returning from the previous games, and I hate them just as much here as I did then. But now to make my blood boil even further, there's the new poison variety, as if instantly killing me with a couple of hits wasn't enough. Blue herbs may not be too far apart, but this addition was positively innocent essential. And to add salt to injury, the dodge maneuver from Resident Evil 3 is gone, which was a little weird to activate, but it was useful when I needed it. Its exclusion isn't the only way to make this game harder anyway, because while you aren't really left empty-handed, the ammo can be more sparse than usual. The crossbow gets a lot of arrows for it, and it's a decent alternative if you run out of pistol ammo, but you have to unload a good portion of arrows to kill one creature. You can get more powerful arrows if you search for them, which is great for dealing with stronger foes, but they're not nearly as plentiful as the regular arrows. You can also acquire dual-wielding machine guns, but I never found them for Claire or Chris. The only time I got to use them was during this very short section where you control Steve. For Claire, I think it can be found in the military training facility somewhere, and for Chris, I believe you have to kill the giant worm thing that's similar to the one in Resident Evil 3. I really wish I did pick them up because that would have made moments like boss fights much less stressful. Although I did obtain the Magnum by holding onto this fire extinguisher you find at the start of the game, and dousing out the fire in the Antarctic base. Veronica does at least introduce continues to the series without needing to save at a typewriter, but they're very selective. From my experience, I was able to do it if I lost to the Antarctic boss and as I regained control of Claire just before the climax. Aside from that, you'll still go back to your last save if you die. Just like Resident Evil 2 and 3, we also have a new battle mode. It's the same as before. You need to reach the end of the stage with your chosen character, all while fighting a number of the creatures you face in the main campaign. You're able to switch to a first-person mode if you want to, which is pretty intriguing. The tank controls are the same, and being in first person does give you a more limited view of what's happening, but it's a neat little experiment. Veronica did come out after Resident Evil Survivor, so I guess Capcom were still testing the waters with the new system until they get it right. You're given infinite ammo in this battle mode, sort of lowering the challenge a little, but I suppose if you really hate yourself, you can always play as Wesker when you unlock him. All he's given is a knife, which isn't quite as useless in this game as it's been in the past, but good friggin' luck dealing with hunters and bandersnatches and the like while trying not to take damage. If you beat this mode as Wesker, I salute you. I didn't overall dislike my time with Veronica, but it had a lot of problems that added up as the game went on. The abundance of backtracking, dark visuals, certain enemies, particular aspects with the level design, Steve, stuff like that which leaves a strange taste in my mouth. It's still the same Resident Evil gameplay we know and love, but something about Veronica feels emptier compared to the PS1 trilogy, and by the time I finished it, I was kinda glad it was over. Despite genuinely enjoying the game, it was draining going through this one, and it's also a bit longer than other classic Resident Evils. Great that you get more content than the previous entries, but there's a hell of a lot of padding as a trade-off, and isn't nearly as replayable. By all means, add this game to your collection, as there are some cool moments in Veronica, but definitely get the HD version if you decide to do so. Veronica's a good game, just not a great one.
I should probably go over Resident Evil 0 first before we head into much bigger territory with Resident Evil 4. If I've done Veronica, I may as well do that game too. Someday. For the next video though, we'll carry on with the Fire Emblem Marathon and talk about the true first game released for Western audiences on the Game Boy Advance, and then afterwards, well, I'm sure you guys have a good idea. Thanks everyone for watching, stay safe, stay healthy, and take care of yourselves. Veronica, oh wait, I don't have the game, what am I doing? Still have Resident Evil Survivor to do from the for about a year until it transferred over to the play, but then turned into its own project, exclusive. Veronica started off as a failed attempt. Stay healthy and take care of yourselves. Woohoo, first take, nice.